people. Good afternoon for those ones in Latin America, United States, and Canada. Good evening for those in the European Union. We are now starting our webinar with our special guest, Professor Luis Sanchez-Masi. I will talk a little about his biography. Professor Luis Sanchez-Masi is an economist graduated from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. He was an executive officer at the Inter-American Development Bank with headquarters in Washington, D.C., and at the CAF Development Bank of Latin America with headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela, institutions which he held positions of high responsibility. His functions at IDB and CAF had put him in contact with the reality of Latin America and the Caribbean and have provided him with an extensive experience in Latin American affairs. He is currently an independent researcher dedicated to the study of Latin American development studies. Professor Luis Sanchez-Masi has authored books and articles on development issues of Latin America and has lectured at universities and international forums. His research interests is Latin American studies, Latin America, development economics, political economy, and that's it. So, Professor political economy and Professor Luis Sanchez will present an article entitled "Latin America in the New Economic Order: A Contribution to the Discussion of Development Policies." So, many thanks, Luis Sanchez-Masi, for having accepted the invitation of the Structuralist Development Macroeconomics Research Group to deliver this webinar today for us. And I think that the audience is yours. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis, for the invitation to make this presentation to your research group. To begin with, I would like to call your attention to a few details about my presentation. First, the reference during my presentation to Latin America as representative of a common reality in the region obviously hides important differences. However, within the topics relevant to this presentation, one may find quite important common aspects, such as dependency on primary products, political and economic volatility, social marginality, corruption, legal uncertainty, and many others. Secondly, most of the statistical information throughout this presentation comes from the World Bank and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. And finally, the reference that I would be making through the presentation to emerging countries from Asia includes the countries of China, South Korea, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. This is the outline of the presentation. We will first examine the emergence since the early 1980s of a new international economic order. Then we'll explore the main characteristics of this new reality, the requirement to join the new economic order, and the opportunities it offers for developing countries. Some developing countries are taking advantage of such opportunities. We'll examine the strategy employed by those countries in joining this new economic reality. Latin American countries, however, have mostly remained on the margin of this new economic reality, a situation that has affected their development. From all of this, a logical question comes to mind. Why have Latin American countries not been able to take advantage of the new economic order? Finally, we'll present some tentative conclusions. In recent decades, a new economic order has been consolidated worldwide. This new reality is essentially the result of three phenomena. First, the progressive liberalization of international trade. Second, the increasing ease of financial flows, especially the repositioning of foreign direct investment. And third, the relocation of the production process across several countries, process known as offshoring. The conjunction of these trends has given rise to a new international economic reality. This is the current dominant economic order, substantially different from the one that existed just 4 decades ago. It is characterized by the widespread global production process, supported by a broad redeployment of foreign direct investment in search of operational advantages offered by certain countries. Until now, this new reality has been confined mainly to the more developed countries and several countries from Asia. The liberalization of trade and capital flows since the early 1980s provided a great incentive for the reorganization of multinational corporations. Originally, multinational corporations were companies that operated in several countries through subsidiaries, producing in an integrated way the same or similar products in each country, but with the activities of the parent company concentrated in their country of origin. Since the early 1980s, a qualitative change in the organization of the multinational corporation began to take place, consisting in the fragmentation of the production process over several countries. This process gave rise to vertical foreign direct investment. That is, foreign investment linked to the vertical specialization of the production process across several countries, in search of advantages in terms of production costs, availability of factor of production, as well as economic incentives and facilities for production and trade. This fragmentation of the production process across several countries is known as global value chain.
Luis, you forgot to share your presentation?
Can you see the presentation?
No,
Oh,
not
I'm
at all.
sorry.
Not at all. Have to share screen. Oh, yes. Now, yes. Now
Can
it's
you see
okay.
now?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Sorry. This is, again, let me go back. This is the outline of the presentation, as I mentioned before. And can you see now?
Yes.
This is the emergence, what I just refer as the emergence of the new economic order and the emergence of new multinational corporations.
Okay. Now we are seeing. Perfect.
Let me see.
Now this way is okay. I think it's not. You can just skip the slides one
Okay.
after another, and it's okay. I think that everybody can see perfectly this way.
Let me go back. Okay. Let's examine now some of the main characteristics of the new economic order, as well as the opportunities it offers and the threat it poses to developing countries. In a nutshell, The defining characteristics of the new economic order can be summarized in the following phenomena that have emerged since the early 1980s. First, the fragmentation of the production process through several countries. Second, the global value chains resulting from the fragmentation of the production process. Third, the vertical foreign direct investment in search of advantages offered by certain countries. Fourth, the growing importance of the trade in inputs as opposed to finished goods. In the period between 2000 and 2014, for example, trade in inputs accounted for about 40% of total world trade. Fifth, the increased relevance of value added in international trade of inputs. From 1995 to 2014, trade through global value chains was responsible for between 60% and 67% of world trade in terms of value added. And finally, the double-edged sword that the new economic order represents for developing countries. Large part of the world production is now structured in global value chains, in which corporations in various countries produce parts, components, and services instead of finished goods, and in turn sell their products to other corporations around the world. The typical made-in manufactured goods have become archaic symbols of an old era. Today, most products are made in the world. No country has a comparative advantage in manufacturing iPhones. What a country may have is a comparative advantage in producing inputs or parts for the iPhone global value chain. Many smartphones and TVs, for example, are designed in the United States or Japan, have sophisticated inputs such as semiconductors and processors, which are produced in South Korea, Taiwan, or Vietnam, are assembled in China, and eventually marketed and serviced virtually all over the world. According to UNTAC and the World Bank, for underdeveloped countries, joining the new economic order through participation in global value chains can be a particularly important means to capture the benefits of better quality and competitive trade and investment, more productive and better paid jobs, and higher economic growth. Global value chains can facilitate access to global markets without having to develop an entire export industry, focusing instead on a few specific activities or components of a global value chain. For an underdeveloped country, the insertion into the new economic order has proven to be the shortcut to achieving the transformation and modernization of its productive structure, and the catalyst for a sustained and inclusive development. The available evidence shows that the developing countries with the highest and sustained growth are precisely those that have a growing participation in the global production process. It is often argued that low wages are a determining factor for a country's insertion into the new economic order and for participating in global value chains. But low wages exist in all developing countries, yet only a few of them engage in global value chains. Labor productivity turns out to be much more important than low wages. Countries with high labor productivity have higher wages, but they remain low-cost producers. In contrast, there are countries that have very low wages but high unit labor costs. The vast majority of countries most involved in global value chains stand out for having low unit labor costs, but not necessarily low wages. Another major challenge for developing countries to participate in global value chains is the non-tariff cost of trade, that is, freight, insurance, border formalities, and other costs associated with the international movement of goods. These costs, which can be expressed as equivalent to ad valorem tariff rates, are generally much higher than tariffs. In sectors with complex value chains where inputs must pass through multiple border crossings before final assembly, such as vehicles, computers, and machinery in general, the non-tariff costs of trade become more than 4 times higher than tariffs. Likewise, products that have complex global value chains that require many exchanges between different companies carry the risk of contractual breach by some participant in the chain. Therefore, countries with serious institutional shortcomings related to the administration of justice, adequate protection of property rights, corruption, and others will not have much chance of participating in global value chain. In addition, to participate in the new economic order, a country must have in place, first, an adequate administrative and physical infrastructure required for the efficient operation of a global value chain, both for the production and trade of inputs. And second, a reasonable policy to provide incentives for attracting foreign direct investment to be able to compete with other countries with similar objectives. If a country is not able to meet all these requirements, very likely it will not be able to successfully participate in the new economic order. In summary, for developed underdeveloped countries, joining the new economic order and participating in global value chains is not an easy task. As mentioned, special policies and incentives are required to attract foreign direct investment. An adequate institutional framework to provide legal security and predictability, and adequate physical and administrative infrastructure to facilitate the production and movement of inputs. To achieve these difficulties, some developing countries, especially the emerging countries from Asia, have established special economic zones where they offer all the requirements necessary to join the new economic order. A survey conducted by UNTAC highlights that, considered by region, these instruments were less used in Europe and Latin America. Most Latin American countries, however, cannot currently meet the requirements to join the new economic reality. Therefore, they have remained on the margin of this new economic order. For them, this reality has become a threat, affecting their development and exacerbating the inadequacy of their development model. Let's review now the strategy adopted by the emerging countries from Asia for joining the new economic order. The core of their strategy including attracting selective vertical foreign direct investment to special economic zones created specifically to obviate their institutional shortcomings, in which they offer legal security and predictability, economic incentives, and facilities for production and trade. At the same time, they conducted a significant institutional strengthening, developed local skills for the absorption, adaptation, and creation of new technologies, implemented social policies to improve the standard of living of the population, and gave a special priority to the improvement of education at all levels. This strategy made possible the rapid access to first world knowledge and technology, the incorporation into global value chains, the extension of global value chains to national corporations, and the diversification of production and export. As a result, the development of this country has been rapid, sustained, and inclusive, substantially better than that of Latin America. Let's review now some of the main aspects of Latin American development since the 1980s and compare it with the development of the emerging countries from Asia. In the early 1980s, the coincidence of four phenomena of singular importance took place that have since marked the course of Latin American development. First, the collapse of the protectionist economic model that has been employed by most Latin American countries since the 1950s. Second, the external debt crisis of the early 1980s. Third, the widespread acceptance of neoclassical economic policy. And finally, the emergence of the new economic order. This unfortunate coincidence led to a significant change in the development model of most Latin American countries and affected their economic performance thereafter. In fact, as a result, since the early 1980s, most Latin American countries adopted a development model based on the basic principles of neoclassical economics. They have since remained outside the new economic order. Their economic growth has become low and erratic, and the region has been losing relative importance in the world. Let's review some relevant information. Since the 1980s, regional GDP growth has slowed down and become erratic, declining from an annual average of 5.8% over the 30 years between 1950 and 1980 to an annual average of only 2.5% between 1980 and 2019, less than 0.5% the average of the previous 30 years. During the 1980 to 2019, Latin America's GDP growth was lower than the world average, the growth of the middle income countries, and the United States. By contrast, the emerging countries from Asia are advancing much faster than Latin America. Between 1980 and 2019, the GDP growth of these Asian countries was between 2 times and up to almost 4 times higher than that of Latin America. The growth of labor productivity in Latin America during the period from 1991 to 2019 was on average only 0.7%, substantially lower than the world average of 2% per year, the United States 1.5%, and the European Union 1.3%. In the emerging countries from Asia, productivity growth was between more than 3 times higher and up to more than 12 times higher than that in Latin America. The GDP of Latin America, which in 1980 represented 9% of world GDP, by 2019 had decreased to 77%. In 1980, Latin America's GDP per capita was 10% higher than the average world GDP per capita, while in 2019 was 13% lower. In 1918, Latin America's GDP per capita represented 24% of the GDP per capita of the United States and 35% of that of the European Union. By 2019, as you can see in this table, those ratios had declined to 17 and 26% respectively. The interesting thing is that this information highlights the fact that in recent decades, Latin America has not been able to advance in the convergence process with the income level of developed countries. The space between those GDP per capita has been lengthened. By contrast, the combined GDP of the 8 emerging countries from Asia, which in 1980 represented only 4% of world GDP, less than half of Latin American GDP in that year, increased to 22% in 2019, more than 3 times that of Latin America. Likewise, all those Asian countries are making progress in the convergence with the income levels of the developed countries, some of them very quickly, as can be seen in this table, that indicates the growth of the ratio between the GDP per capita of those countries and that of the United States. Let's now examine some of the most relevant features of the productive structure of Latin American countries. The productive structure of Latin American countries continues to be characterized by absolute and comparative advantage concentrated in primary products, that is, fuel, food, mineral, and raw materials. Their development depending to a large extent on the price and demand of those products. Social marginalization endures, and income distribution in the region is the most unequal in the world. And the institutional environment persists as an important constraint to its development, especially political volatility, economic unpredictability, legal uncertainty, corruption, and others. If this trend persists, the already manifested distrust and skepticism of Latin Americans with their democratic regimes and institutions would certainly be seriously aggravated. As in past centuries, Latin American countries continue to participate in the world economy mainly with the export of their primary products, in which they have an absolute or comparative advantage, as can be seen in this table. On the other hand, imports remain concentrated in manufactured products that in recent years reach 75% of total merchandise imports. Remain concentrated in manufactured products that in recent years reach 75% of total merchandise. In essence, the structure of foreign trade remains similar to that of past centuries, although traded products have been changing over time. This is, I think, a very important table. You can see that the agricultural sector remained the most dynamic, the one with the highest productivity growth. Value added as a percentage of regional GDP has declined in the industrial sector, reflecting an important deindustrialization process in the region. It also declined in the agricultural sector while increasing in the services sector. The employed population, in the third column, is migrating from the most productive sector, agriculture, to activities in which productivity has practically stagnated, the services sector. This is a phenomenon exactly contrary to the process of structural modernization and transformation, in which the employed population should be migrating towards more productive activities. Apparently, the Latin American economy is evolving into an inefficient service economy. This reality would seem to explain the high informality and the lack of good employment opportunities. It also foretells an uncertain future about the quality of employment and regional development. In the last 4 decades, Latin American countries have not been able to find the development model that could generate a high and sustained rate of economic growth. As long as their economic growth remained erratic and low, let's say below a sustained average of between 5% and 6%, they will most likely not be able to generate better job opportunities and the necessary resources to consistently mitigate the endemic social problems. The persistence of high level of social marginalization and inequality are of particular concern. In addition to being socially unjust, they constitute an obstacle to the democratic governance of Latin American countries. It seems that frustration with the inability to consistently mitigate the serious social problems that afflict most countries in the region is one of the main reasons for the continuous political and economic volatility, with government policies leaning sometimes to the right and others to the left. Lately, Latin American countries have been concerned primarily with their insertion in international trade, seeking to expand market for their traditional export. In fact, in international forum on international trade, such as the Doha round, which ended in 2015, and the agreement of the Mercosur countries with the European Union, signed in July of 2019, Latin American countries have agreed to a greater opening of developed countries to the export of their primary products in exchange for greater liberalization for the import of manufactured products. While this is important for the region's economy, this line of agreement, however, will inevitably lead to preserving their same comparative advantage, maintaining their dependence on primary products, and strengthening asymmetric international trade. Although in international trade all participants obtain benefits, in asymmetric international trade, that is, between countries of different level of development, the benefits are not necessarily distributed equally among the parties involved. Proportionally, it tends to benefit more the party that trades in goods that incorporate more advanced technology and greater value added, that is, the most developed countries, and to a lesser extent, the ones that trade in primary products, such as the Latin American countries. This asymmetry, as Prebisch warned about 7 decades ago, end up influencing the standard of living of the parties involved. In the 21st century, the great challenge facing the Latin American countries is to insert themselves not only in international trade, but also, and most importantly, in the global production process in order to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the new economic order. It is important to note that insertion into the new economic order is not an alternative to exploiting the region's current absolute and comparative advantages. In no way should the countries of the region abandon these activities. On the contrary, they should constantly try to incorporate increasing productivity and value added into them. However, economic history records an irrefutable evidence and lesson. The development process implies in its essence the transformation and modernization of productive structures through the continuous incorporation of more productive activities. Similarly, as implied by Prebisch, in the long term, productivity and income in primary sectors are normally lower than productivity and income in sectors that exploit knowledge and the most advanced technologies. These facts highlights the need for Latin American countries to diversify their production and export by adding new and more productive activities to their current economic structure. Much has been written about the need to diversify production and export as a necessary condition to achieve a better development. That is the need to transform and modernize the productive structure of Latin American countries. However, the big dilemma has been how to achieve this necessary structural transformation. It appears that the recipes that have been proposed up to now have not proven to be successful. In the condition of today's world, what new goods and services to produce? How to produce them? With what technology? How to get the technology to produce new goods and services? How to compete with a multinational corporation? In this respect, the strategy employed by the emerging countries from Asia should be a guideline for Latin American countries. That is, to use the new economic order as a shortcut to economic transformation and high, sustained, and inclusive development. One may ask, why can Latin American governments and policymakers appreciate the opportunities offered by the new economic order and seek to take advantage of them? Why have the Latin American countries failed to imitate the emerging countries from Asia? The answer is not obvious, just some subjective presumptions. Could it be that most Latin American countries see in the new economic order a political threat to their self-determination? Or is it that distrust of foreign direct investment still persists, a remnant of past decades when it was perceived as an instrument of developed countries to take advantage of their national wealth? It would seem that political leaders of the region are more concerned with their internal power struggles than with what is happening in the outside world. On the other hand, it is clear that most Latin American countries do not meet the social institutional conditions necessary to participate in the new economic order. Whatever the explanation may be, the fact is that the region has remained on the sidelines of this new economic reality and the opportunities it offers. Let me now try to advance some tentative conclusions. If Latin American countries fail to take advantage of the opportunities offered by the new economic order, the growth will most likely remain low and erratic, unable to generate better job opportunities and the necessary resources to mitigate their social marginalization. If so, it is predictable that political and economic volatility will continue, with governments sometimes leaning to the left and others to the right, vainly seeking better alternatives, as attested by the experience of most Latin American countries in the last 4 decades. Remaining outside the new economic order has highlighted the inadequacy of the current development model of Latin American countries and is accentuating their marginalization in the world of the 21st century. It is disturbing to imagine the future of Latin America if this trend were to continue. In the condition of today's world, the insertion into the new economic order is perhaps the most effective option for an underdeveloped country to achieve a rapid modernization and transformation of its productive structure and generate a sustained and inclusive development. In short, in this presentation, I have tried to bring to your attention another perspective on a fundamental problem of Latin American development. That is the urgent need to complement the current absolute and comparative advantage of the countries of the region with the continuous introduction into their economic structure of new and more productive activities. To achieve this goal, the strategy employed by the emerging countries from Asia has proven to be the right path, which could well be a guideline for Latin American countries. Allow me a final message. First, Latin American countries must recognize that their current development model has not produced the expected results. The region is losing relevance in the world, ceding spaces to emerging countries from Asia. Latin American LAC is multidimensional. It includes economic, technological, scientific, social, and institutional aspects. Secondly, Latin American countries must understand and accept that a new reality has been installed in the world. It is not a political dilemma, it is an eminently economic reality. Finally, Latin America must find a way to take advantage of the opportunities offered by this new reality, as the countries from Asia are doing. The dilemma is clear. If they do not, the new economic order will continue to be a threat, confining the region to a lower tier among the nations of the world. Thank you very much.
Professorero, we can hear you.
Many thanks, Luis, for your nice presentation, and have read your paper this morning in my office. I think that we both have much points of agreement, and but I have some doubts and questions that I would like to make to you. But first, beginning with the agreement. I think that the main point of agreement that we have is that the Latin American growth performance in the last 40 years was a complete disaster. Um, I'm a son of European immigrants. My mother was Portuguese, my father Spanish. My father arrived in Brazil in 1954. My mother arrived in 1956. They met in 1970, and I was born in 1971. When I was born, Brazil was in its economic miracle. Brazil was growing at 14% per year in the period between 1968 to 1973. From the larger period of 1930 to 1980, Brazil grown at an average rate of 7% per year. And basically, it reaches the status of a middle income country in the beginning of the 80s. In the beginning of the 80s, the manufacturing output of Brazilian industry was larger than the combined manufacturing output of China, India, and South Korea. We had, at the beginning of the 80s, the most advanced manufacturing industry in the developing world. Well, after the debt crisis and the so-called lost decade in Brazil, we lost the track. What we saw after the lost decade was an attempt to resume growth in Brazil. I will talk mainly on Brazilian case, but I think that is representative of the Latin American experience. In the 90s, we adopted the prescriptions of the so-called Washington Consensus during for instance, the two terms of Fernando Henrique Cardoso administration. Fernando Henrique Cardoso was a left intellectual that have to run out of the country when we have the military coup in 1964. He went to Paris, and then he returned when the regime became to be more open. But Fernando Henrique Cardoso does not belong to the ECLAC, to the CEPAL. He had a theory, a socioeconomic theory, that it can be called dependence theory. According to his dependence theory, and I'm saying that because it's important to understand what happens to Brazil. According to his dependence theory, which opposes to the ECLAC's view, it was impossible for Brazil or Latin American economies to have a national development because the local elites had very tight relations with the empire, the center countries. And so the only possibility of development for Brazil and other Latin American economies is to be associated with the center countries, to the empire. So, with this experience, with this theoretical framework in mind, when Fernando Henrique was elected president in 1994, his mandate begins in 1995. He started a huge program of economic reforms that liberalized the external trade, reducing import tariffs, privatized a great number of state and owned enterprises, liberalized the capital account, and well, mainly he had the theory that the Brazilian economic development will be financed by the foreign direct investment. Well, the result of his reforms was a tragedy for the Brazilian manufacturing industry. The combination of overvalued exchange rate because of very high interest rates with trade openness basically destroyed the intermediate sector of manufacturing industry and begin our premature deindustrialization. During the Fernando Henrique rules for 80 years, when this model was adopted, the first term of Lula administration from 2003 to 2008, 2006 was more of the same, basically. So the combination of very high interest rates and a very overvalued exchange rate, and the idea that Brazil had to attract foreign direct investment in order to develop. But the problem is that the industrialization continued, and now we are now in 2022. The share of the manufacturing industry in GDP is more or less 10%. In 1975, it was almost 32 or 33%. So the Brazilian experience shows that the problem was not, in the case of Brazil, was not to open the economy. We have done that, but we had made it on the wrong way, So that's my disagreement with your conclusions. You see, now the elites of the Latin American countries may have fear of the new economic order. Well, Fernando Henrique Cardoso did not have fear. On the contrary, Brazil adopted precisely the prescriptions of the Washington Consensus, and we do not have the results that are supposed to have with the Washington Consensus. And the difference that I can see with Latin America and the Asian countries is that the Asian countries did not follow the prescriptions of the Washington Consensus. As you write on your paper, yes, they attract foreign direct investment, but is a very specific investment for specific areas and greenfield investment. There is no, for instance, a lot of capital inflows for portfolio investment that we have here in Brazil, Argentina, or in other countries. They had also a policy in case of China, which it's very important. They have a policy, a macroeconomic policy that make real exchange rate competitive. So they have the worry of the level of real exchange rate. They do not have any permanent situation of overvalued exchange rate that we here in Latin America always committed the same mistake. Argentina and Chile committed this mistake at the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. And Brazil only committed that on the 90s and again in the 2000s. But I think that mainly the problem of the combination of very high in short-term interest rates with overvalued exchange rate was the main source of the premature industrialization of the Brazilian economy. More, I think that maybe we are incapable to join this your new economic order because of this macroeconomic problem. I think that the macroeconomic problem, the combination of real overvalued real exchange rate and high interest rates are the main problem in the case of Brazil. The second question that I would like to make to you is the following. Since the COVID-19 sanitary crisis and the war of the Ukraine, we are seeing what can be the beginning of a process of deglobalization. So the global value chains maybe will be shortened, and some phases of the production process that were done in China or in the East Asia can be now done more near Europe and the United States. So this can be a real chance for Latin American economies to reindustrialize if they are capable to show to the American and European multinational corporations that they are more friendly and more trustable for global value chains than, for instance, China or Russia or any country on the Pacific. This is my questions. Can you choose if you want to respond they now, or I can make to you the comments of the audience.
I guess if you don't mind, I would like to address your questions now.
Okay.
Well, among other things, I do agree with most of what you have said. I do not agree, however, with your characterization of why Latin American countries, you refer mostly to Brazil, but it may apply also to other Latin American countries, why they have not been able to reindustrialize and join the new economic order. I don't believe that is the macro policy that is the crucial element. It is important, no doubt about it. I believe, however, that there is other more important elements, which are related to the institutional aspect. The confidence that Latin American countries offer to foreign direct investment. Look at the situation in your country now, with what is happening now and the possibility of change. What happened when Lula and Dilma left office? There was a big change in the political philosophy of the government. And now possibly it's going to be another one if Lula wins again. This type of situation happens all over in Latin America. Look at Argentina. from before Macri, and then Fernandez, and who knows what is coming next. Look what happened in Venezuela, and take any country, Ecuador, and so forth. This situation does not create the proper environment for a long-term view of foreign direct investment. If we do not solve this type of situation, we are never going to be able to insert ourselves into the new economic order, no matter what type of macroeconomic policy we have. So to me, this is the crucial aspect. Create the social institutional environment does not provide that incentive. Corruption is all over the place. Look at what now is happening in Argentina. The executive power is discrediting the judicial power. How could that instill confidence in anyone who wants to invest in that country? So, and until we solve this type of problem, and to me, the way to solve this problem, and that's what I mentioned, the emerging country from Asia, is to create these social, special economic zones parallel to the reality of Latin America, but isolated from that reality, where countries can offer, like they do in the emerging country from Asia, security, facility for production and trade, and long-term view of what is going to happen if you go to those economic zones. That is the way these countries are doing. These countries, like China, for example, at the beginning, before the revolution the change in 1978, was a country with so important social problems that it was not possible to conceive of what China is now. However, they started with only 4 special economic zones where they provided good infrastructure, good contract for foreign investment, incentive, and so forth. Very rapidly, this was expanded to about 30 other cities in China, and a big influx of foreign direct investment came in there. Certainly, there is obviously a big market in China. But the same situation happened in Vietnam, another small country. Vietnam had a similar revolution in 1986, but the economic system had begun to change. The core of that strategy also was the creation of the special economic zones. Now, Vietnam is growing at the rate of over 6% per year. Same is happening with other countries in Asia. They are using this strategy to create confidence and incentive to attract foreign direct investment. Now, I don't believe that in Latin America, unless we do something about providing this incentive, I don't think that we are ever going to get out of the situation where we are now. Now, you mentioned another thing, the reindustrialization. Reindustrialization in the world today is very difficult. It's impossible. What technology? Where will you get the technology necessary to reindustrialize the country unless you do that by bringing in foreign direct investment? Since the 1980s, a big oligopolistic trend in the generation of knowledge and technology is taking place. Nowadays, most scientific and technological advances are concentrated in research centers and universities from developed countries and multinational corporations. Most of the scientific, a great part of the scientific and technological advance is owned by these multinational corporations. So unless you are able to bring them in, you will not be able to access the technology necessary to produce goods and services that can be competitive in the world. So I don't know if I'm totally clear about my points, but I think that one aspect there, or one very difficult problem that we have in Latin America is that we don't have the institutional environment to provide certainty, predictability that you need for a long-term investment. And unless we are able to do that, it's very difficult to attract foreign investment, to re-industrialize, and to be able to have a sustained and inclusive development in the 21st century. This is a very different situation that we have now. It's very different than just 4 decades ago. I mean, this is a new reality that we have. And unless in Latin America we are able to understand this new reality and accept this new reality, it's going to be very difficult to move the region out of the situation that we are now. Thank you.
Okay, so we have some questions from the audience. Steve Mack, Professor, what is your view about the importance of a competitive real exchange rate in order to engage in sophisticated parts of the global value chains?
Well, as I mentioned before, if we are talking about Latin America, I don't believe that the macroeconomic policies, even though they're important, are sufficient in order to attract foreign direct investment and to initiate a process of reindustrialization. There are other aspects which I mentioned that are more important than that.
Okay, the next one, also by Steve. And robotization cause income inequality between countries to increase even more. Is Brazil ready to incorporate robotization?
Well, maybe you can ask you can answer the question about Brazil. I don't know about that. Yes, I think that robotization and technology is creating great differences, not only among countries, but is creating a great difference in income between the developed countries. You can see that in the United States. You can see that in most developed countries. There is inequality is growing. It's growing because the technology is very exclusive and demanding of great knowledge and very selective type of capability. You have that, you are in the top. You don't, you'll be very, very, very low in the scale. So yes, robotization and newer technology will very likely increase the difference among countries, and even within developed countries will increase the inequality within those countries.
Okay, we have another question from Elder Ferreira Filho. Brazil has dozens of multinationals in the country. Even so, just to explore the consumer market. How to get the search done here, as you suggest?
Just explore the consumer market. Well, as I said, I'm not that familiar with the Brazilian situation, but I can, from what I have seen is that Brazil is one of the largest recipients of foreign direct investment in Latin America. However, this foreign direct investment is mostly attractive and geared to the Brazilian internal market. And Brazil is not participating to a great extent in the global value chains of multinational corporations. It's very limited from what I know in that respect. So it's mostly attractive to Brazil for the internal market.
Well, I think that we do not have more comments from the audience, but I would like to make some comments on your comments.
Okay.
The case of Argentina is a lost case. Argentina, when Prebisch born in 1901, Argentina had the second GDP per capita of the world, just behind the United States. And then they have a long process of falling behind. And yes, in the case of Argentina, there is these institutional problems that you mentioned. For instance, the most known case was related with Prebisch himself. Prebisch was the first general governor of the Central Bank of Argentina, and when the Central Bank of Argentina was created in the 30s, much before the creation of the Brazilian Central Bank, um, the Central Bank of Argentina had independence. But when Perón assumed the power, he managed to fire Raul Prebisch, that then go to Chile to start the eclac. So I think that the case of Argentina is a really a disaster case, and the changing of our institutions and so on and so forth. It's not our case. You mentioned the Lula and Dilma government. As Brazilian, I can say to you that since the election of Fernando Henrique Cardoso in 1995 up to 2014, we are a very stable country in political terms. Basically, what we have is a normal change of government, as for instance occurs in Spain. In Spain has a left-wing party, which is the Socialist Party, and a right-wing party, which is the Popular Party, and they alternate together in power in democratic terms. And of course, when the left-wing party is in charge, they have more social policies than when the right-wing party is on power. But there is no big differences between the parties on power, and it's basically what occurs in Brazil when Lula succeed Fernando Henrique Cardoso in 2003. Uh, there is a small change on industrial policies, yes. During the Lula administration, there is more emphasis on the role of the state uh, in industrial policy, a thing that Fernando Henrique Cardoso simply does not believe there was effective. But the main macroeconomic policies was the same, with just little changes from one government to another. But we have 16 years of a very stable democracy. After 2013 and the protests and riots that occurs in the first government of Dilma Rousseff, something went wrong in the country. We still do not know exactly. It's difficult to understand what happens, but the Brazilian society become very much more radical and shared and divided than it was before that time. So this is what made possible for a completely incompetent man to reach the presidents of the republic. I'm telling about Bolsonaro. So what we expect to happen in the October 2 is the first round of the election, is that Lula can win in the first round, and Brazil will return to certain normality. Because this man, Bolsonaro government, was a tragedy for the country. He's a populist government, and he was basically destroying all the public policies that were built in Brazil since the redemocratization. We have a constitution from 1988. This constitution established a social welfare state, but also policies for instance, conservation, the environment that Bolsonaro is simply destroying, and that he doesn't care, right? So with Bolsonaro, if Bolsonaro won a second term, I think that even the agribusiness sector will be negatively affected by this. You can see what now in Europe they are doing, imposing a carbon tax on primary exports, they are basically targeting Brazil and Bolsonaro government. So I think that after these elections, Brazil will return to a normality in terms of politics, and we hope that we can resume growth to grow at least 3% per year. I'm not very optimistic about the economic future of Brazil because, as you can see, I think that we have a severe problem of premature industrialization, and without reindustrialization, I think that is basically impossible Brazil to have uh, high growth rates as 5 or 6% per year, which would be necessary for us to reach the high income levels in say 30 or 40 years. So, but I'm very optimistic that we will return to a normality in political terms that can make us to grow say 3% per year. So our growth of per capita income will be 2% per year, more or less, and that's our future.
Jose Luis, if I can just make a comment on your comment,
Of course,
if we have time.
yes.
Well, it's precisely what you just mentioned. The uncertainty of what may come in any country in Latin America. The uncertainty of what may come now in Brazil, for example. And the uncertainty when Bolsonaro came to power. The uncertainty in Colombia when Petro came to power. Nobody knows yet where is
But
that.
Pedro has a very good minister of finances, my friend.
I know him. I know him very well. I know Jose Antonio very well, and I'm fear for him.
Yes,
So,
me too.
so I don't know. So you see, that is the uncertainty that it is not in Spain, as you mentioned. I know Spain very well also, and between the alternation between the Partido Popular and El PSOE does not change the basic structure of the country and the basic confidence that the country may show. In addition to that, is a member of the European community. That itself imposes a tremendous discipline and tremendous constraint as to what the government there can do. That we don't have in Latin America. Look at the case of Colombia, as I mentioned. Look at the case of Ecuador, Correa, then Lenin, and then now a new government. I mean, going from one extreme, well, not extreme, but from one side to another side. Look at the situation in Venezuela. Look at Venezuela was before Chavez and what it is now. Look at the countries in Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, even Chile. Look at Chile. Nobody knew what was going to happen when Boric came to power. And well, hopefully it'll do very well. But this uncertainty, unpredictability of what is going on or what will come in Latin America is what does not provide the certainty and the security to attract foreign direct investment. That's one comment. The other comment is you're saying that Brazil should reindustrialize, and in general Latin America should industrialize. I got the figure here from 1980 to 2020. In the GDP, the valor agregado, the value added in the industrial sector in Brazil went from almost 39% in 1980 to less than 18% in 2020. In Colombia, it went from 32 to 24. In Chile, it went from 37 to 31. Only in Mexico, Mexico to me is a very special case because of the the treaty with the United
The
States and
US.
Canada. So, but if you're saying reindustrialization, I would ask you to think, how do you reindustrialize Brazil or any other country in Latin America? What will the industry in Brazil produce? With what technology? What will they do?
The green industrialization. The
Well,
question is that now we have a chance, given by the climate change, to reindustrialize in another basis. In order
but
we
to
have
produce what?
change to change from the brown industries to green industries. We have, for instance, in Brazil, we have an automobile industry capable to produce 5 million cars per year. Now it had is producing 2.5 million, 3 million. We have a lot of idle capacity. Okay, but one question for Brazil is what we will do with our automobile industry. What will be the technology that will be adopted by our automobile industry in this new brave world of the climate change? The problem is that because of Bolsonaro government, uh, the government says nothing about what the paths the country should take in order to deal with the climate change. We have to change the type of cars that we produce. We have to increase the production of clean energy that unfortunately in the last 20 years we have decreased the share of the clean energy in our energy matrix. So we have to increase it again. So we can reindustrialize. Our cities, our big cities, have major traffic problems. We have to invest to make a lot of investments in public transportation. So
Yeah, but
I know how to industrialize. So
well,
the question is that the state had to define what is the path, and the private sector will follow it. That's the point. So and the opportunity that is open for us because of the climate change is to make a new industrial revolution, adapting the old industry to the new industry. Is a green,
but
which is a
that is
green.
going on right now, Jose Luis. That's going on right now all over the world, especially in
Yes,
the
but not
developed
here.
countries.
But not here.
Okay,
Not
but
here.
with what technology would you do that? For example, take a car. Ford is investing billions of dollars in creating new technology for new cars of the future. The same is doing Tesla, and the same is doing General Motors. The same is doing all the major car producers in the world, including in China, which is the largest producer of EV, electrical vehicle in the world. So how to compete with that? There goes my point is the following, that if you want to get into this type of things, you will need to deal with foreign direct investment. And that's where the Achilles heel for Latin America is. How do you are able to bring those industry to Latin America with this institutional uncertainty that we have right now? All this technology, the only country that can produce this technology are the developed countries. They are the ones that have the multinational corporation that can produce this technology. And if we don't associate with them like the Asian countries are doing, and I'm not talking only of China. China is already on its own, but I'm talking about Vietnam. I'm talking about Malaysia, Indonesia. I mean, these are countries of the future. I mean, already growing so fast, so much faster than Latin America, and getting their population out of poverty at a tremendously rapid rate. We're not doing that. We are already one of the country, one of the region with the most unequal distribution of income in the world.
Yes. Yes.
Tremendous inequality. So my point is the following. I mean, there is a new reality in the world. There is a concentration of the knowledge and technology. Look at, I can send you information on for example, how many the patents registered by Latin America as opposed to those registered by Asian countries. It's tremendous difference. Income from selling of knowledge and technology from Latin America as opposed to countries from Asia. The gap is growing every day. We are technologically and scientifically being left behind. So unless we are able to do like the Asian countries are doing, associate ourselves with foreign direct investment, it is very difficult, in my view, to reindustrialize. And in my view, Jose Luis, Brazil has a very important role to play. Brazil could become the China of Asia. Brazil could be the China of Latin America. The China of Latin America, and initiate a process of integration, a new process of integration based on global value chain, by inserting Brazil first into the new economic order, and then bringing the other countries in Latin America into that global value chain. That will create a completely different type of integration process, a more productive and a more with a brighter future than all the other integration processes that have already failed.
Okay, Luis, I think that we have no more time. It's almost 4 o'clock p.m. here in Brazil. So I thank to you for your presentation. And I will also thanks to the general public for the questions that are sent by the chat. And Luis, thanks. Do you want to say anything and goodbye?
Well, no, nothing more than I think I already said too much. I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I mean, I think it was very, very useful to be able to listen to you and being able to having this opportunity of presenting my views on this topic that to me is a crucial issue for Latin America's future. And again, thank you so much, Jose Luis. I appreciate it.
Okay, many thanks, Luis Sanchez. And now we are, ending this webinar. Many thanks for the ones that view, that are with us online, and those that cannot see online. This webinar is recorded in our channel, and anyone can see anytime he or she pleases. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.